Even Matt Booty's statement that he made that they want smaller games on the back of the Tango thing, which was probably a little insensitive of him to say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a little.
that was a brain dead statement.
That was
There is no excuse for that.
because he's referring to studios like teams like Grounded, which was built with 13 people. Hi-Fi Rush is a full development cycle project. Like there's a difference between a team that has 150 people working on it and the cost involved with that. That's a full dev cycle, 4 or 5 year development, compared to something like Grounded, which was made with which originally started with 7 people.
Yeah.
And moved over to like 10, 13 people by the end of it, which is a lot more easy to maintain.
Light
and
No
he even made
Fire
references to Dave the Diver.
Yeah, Light No Fire is a team actually of 12 people they announced, and they might scale up a little bit as that game gets ready to come to fruition. And essentially what I see kind of related to what you're talking about, Chaos, in the industry right now is AA is crushing it and AAA is just collapsing. And it's not that there isn't going to be a good AAA game. I think obviously Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the exception to that rule this year, but where last year we saw AAA banger after banger, this year we're seeing the $40 AA come in swinging, and gamers are all in on that, and those are being led by smaller teams, and that in and of itself only just makes like Microsoft's like decision here all the more baffling, because it's not that they don't have the capital to keep those running, but is it a matter of like, obviously we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, because I always say within game development, HR is the invisible winner or nightmare situation behind that studio's success. Because if you have people who are just leaving and leaving and leaving, and that talent leaves, doesn't make sense to keep that name. You're going to hold on to the IP, but if you don't have people who actively want to make your game, then it's not going to be a good game. And so there's not a lot of value in just dumping money down a pit if everybody who's left is, isn't interested in making the game that you wanted them to make. Take Ori and the Blind Forest, for example, and Will of the Wisps. Like, that IP is owned by Microsoft, but it was developed by Moon Studios, and Moon Studios really wanted to do something different. They didn't want to sit down and work on Ori 3, even though it was going to be both financially probably successful and critically acclaimed.
You mentioned AA, and there's been a lot of this AA, AAA, quadruple A mentioned over the last couple of years. When quadruple A got mentioned, it got ridiculed. But like, let's back up to like what AAA comes from. It comes from a financial backing standpoint. The idea that if you invest more money into a financial mechanism, that it is more likely to give returns. It's an offset of risk. And so quadruple A, from a money in standpoint, they got mocked, but I don't know that we haven't had quadruple A's. I don't know that Halo Infinite was not quadruple A from just a fiscal risk standpoint, that it should have been a sure thing. Now, they did a TV show, they did a game, and they've just fed into each other in how bad they can each be. And so I think that says in gaming, more money doesn't mean more return. Yeah. And so while layoffs, like anytime in my life I've had financial instability, it's always been minor. Like, my company was struggling, which means I can go somewhere else and find work. Or I am misaligned with, and I can make a change and I can find work. But when you see an industry wide like this, I don't have any personal ability to speak to that. I know that's going on in some aspects of tech as well. But I can say, like, layoffs on their own, while the individual is hurt terribly, they also represent a very natural churn portion of the population. So if within a relatively short order, those people can be brought back on in a AA capacity, is that really what we're seeing here? Are we just seeing something that's disruptive more than harmful, like when we speak macro?
Yeah, I do think that is one of the wishful, hopeful things that can come out of this, is that as these large games that are taking more money and taking longer development costs start to fail, those big companies aside, a lot of the time, these people end up going to other companies that are more stable. I mean, Nintendo hired 400 new people throughout this year alone so far, and Capcom seems to be doing well, or they start their own studios. And my hopeful thing is that they start to realize, rather than just going for the latest and greatest in technology and complexity, they lean into more simple, more fun, innovative design too, which I think really does stabilize the gaming industry, and frankly, brings just more fun to all of us as well. Now, to your point, Chris, how many people are in that position where after they lose a job, they can go join other people or start their own team? I don't know, but I do think it's a disruption. I think the industry at a large is too big to just kind of collapse completely. So that is a hopeful thing. And the whole capital thing, that's a good point. One thing 2024 did see is a real increase in interest rates. So even if a lot of these big companies are sitting on capital, how much debt do they have? That's all of a sudden just looking at them in a way where like, oh, we got to pay a lot more back, and that's what leads to it. But I'm with you. I think there will be more innovation, and not to get ahead of the curve, but I think that relates to some of the other news we're talking about too, with companies that are more conservative in a sense, but they lean on more innovative, fun ways to play without just spending a ton of money.
But I also think time is probably one of the big factors here. When you look at games like Elder Scrolls 6, which will probably be out when my kids have kids, you got Fallout 5, which is in development.